Welcome to FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic literacy podcast to help you cram for the FCLE. I'm your host, Mercedes Musto, and today we've got another hot and spicy landmark Supreme Court case from 2010 called Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, FEC. This one is a little bit about a film titled Hillary, the Movie, and a lot about campaign finance law, free speech, and corporate influence in elections. That's a lot. Yeah, let's get started. Landmark Supreme Court case number 26, Citizens United versus the FEC 2010. Case background. Okay, here's the background. Citizens United, a nonprofit corporation, produced a film called Hillary, the Movie, which critiqued Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton's suitability for the presidency. Now, this film was set to air during the 2008 election season, but ran into a roadblock, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, or BICRA, which regulates electioneering communications. Oh, that sounds so complicated. A little bit more background here. See, Section 2003 of BICRA blocks corporations and labor unions from funding such communications like advertisements or films using their general treasury funds. Also important here are Sections 201 and 311, which require disclosing donors and adding disclaimers if the communication isn't authorized by the candidate. So, regarding the Hillary the Movie film and its advertisements, Citizens United argued that Section 203 violated the First Amendment, and they also challenged Sections 201 and 203, saying the disclosure and disclaimer rules were unconstitutional in their case. They took their fight to the U.S. District Court, but the District Court said nah, citing the Supreme Court's earlier ruling in McConnell versus the FEC, which largely upheld the constitutionality of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, BICRA, also known as the McCain-Feingold Act. Boy, this is so complicated. Back to the case. Okay. The case reached the Supreme Court, which tackled four key questions. First, did McConnell settle all the as-applied challenges to the BICRA's disclosure requirements? Second, do those disclosure rules violate the First Amendment by burdening protected political speech? Third, can communications without a clear call to vote for or against a candidate still be regulated under BICRA? And fourth, should a documentary like Hillary the Movie be treated like the ads referenced in McConnell versus the FEC? And should that fall under the BICRA's regulation? The court's decision. Okay, we've got four questions to answer here. And I like the way oyas.org put it, and that was no, no, yes, yes. Got it? Good. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Citizens United on the core issue that, quote, corporate funding of independent political broadcasts in candidate elections cannot be limited, end quote. The court answered the questions. No, McConnell didn't resolve all the as-applied challenges. And no, the disclosure requirements don't unconstitutionally burden political speech. Yes, communications can be regulated under BICRA even without explicit calls to vote. And yes, a documentary like Hillary the Movie can be subject to BICRA rules. The big takeaway? The court struck down Section 203's ban on corporate funding of independent political broadcasts, overruling parts of McConnell versus the FEC and an earlier case called Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce. The majority held that the First Amendment protects political speech even when it comes from a corporation. They argued that free speech is essential to democracy and that the speaker's corporate identity doesn't diminish that right. However, the court upheld the BICRA's disclosure and disclaimer requirements, saying they serve a legitimate government interest in informing voters about who's funding election-related communications. The ban on direct corporate contributions to candidates also stood. The decision wasn't without dissent. Several justices argued that corporations aren't individuals and that the government has a compelling interest in limiting corporate spending to prevent undue influence in elections. There's a lot more to unpack with this complicated case, and I do always encourage you to look it up yourself. The constitutional principle. Now remember, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. In this case, we're talking about the freedom of speech. Freedom of speech protects the right to express ideas and information without fear of government censorship or retaliation. This includes a wide range of expressions from political speech to symbolic acts. Let's review. The key takeaways from Citizens United versus the FEC 2010 are, number one, in the court's decision, the majority opinion held that the First Amendment protects political speech, and this protection isn't diminished simply because the speaker is a corporation or a union. Number two, the court struck down a core provision of campaign finance law. The court ruled that Section 203 of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, BICRA, which banned corporations and unions from using their general treasury funds for independent political broadcasts, was unconstitutional. This decision overturned parts of earlier precedents, including McConnell versus FEC. Number three, disclosure and disclaimer rules were upheld. Although the court struck down the ban on spending, it upheld BICRA's requirements for disclosing who funds election-related communications. The court argued that these rules serve a legitimate government interest in providing transparency to the voters. And number four, the 5-4 decision was contested, with dissenting justices arguing that the government has a compelling interest in limiting corporate spending to prevent undue influence on elections. The Citizens United landmark Supreme Court case remains a lightning rod in American politics. It expanded the role of corporate money in elections by allowing unlimited independent spending while upholding transparency through disclosure rules. It's a case that forces us to wrestle with the balance between free speech and the influence of big money in a democracy. That's it for today's episode of FCLE Seminar, a civic literacy exam podcast. If you found this breakdown of Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and join us next time for another landmark Supreme Court case. Until then, stay informed and keep asking those big, hot and spicy questions. This is your host, Mercedes Musto. Join me again on FCLE Seminar, a Florida Civic Literacy Exam podcast, so you can pass the FCLE.